Welcome back to our third video in the lecture series on animation in Ogre. And what I'm going to do in this video is to show you, first we're going to start looking at how we can check out and see what are the animations that are integrated and created with a model. And what we're going to do is we're going to print them out on the screen and kind of get a view of what animations there are. And then we are going to also take a look at how we can add objects to sockets in our animation, kind of attach objects to the bones of our mesh, and utilize a couple more animation states to kind of have the Sinbad. We'll give the Sinbad two swords for the left hand and for the right hand, and then we're going to have it perform a slice action in, vertically and horizontally when we press the left and right mouse buttons. So first, let's see how we can use our animation states and populate a set for our animation state, and then pull out all of the animation states that are included within our mesh. The process is actually fairly straightforward. We're going to go to in the code to the create scene, where our scene is being created, and we're creating the mesh and the light and the entity and the ground and our scene nodes and all of those. So we're going to basically look at and create an animation state pointer, animation state set pointer. So animation state set pointer, call it set, and then look at our Sinbad object, which is the Sinbad's entity that we have here, and we're going to populate the set from the animations that are included within the Sinbad. So we're going to basically ask Sinbad to give us all animation states. So what this is, the set is actually a queue. It's a data structure that basically puts in all of the animation states objects that are present with our Sinbad mesh in its skeleton and the animation files that accompany it, and then it places them into this set, which is the animation state set. Notice that we are getting the pointer to the animation state set. So this set is actually a pointer. So it basically gives us the address of all those animations that are created. So effectively, it's going to go into the heap. And it's not going to occupy space in our program stack. Ogre has also an animation state iterator that we can actually populate, and that way we'll be able to kind of sort of get a listing of all these animation states, and then we'll be able to actually pass through them and work through them. So we're going to also create an animation state iterator, and I'm going to call it ITR, and I'm going to populate this from the set of the animations. So get animation state iterator. Now, once I have this iterator, then I can actually use this in a loop to be able to go through each and every one of those animations and work them out. So I'm going to create a while loop, and I'm going to ask it to run as long as my iterator has more elements in it. So as long as my iterator has elements in it, this while loop is going to run. What I'm going to do then with this while loop is basically print out the next element. So get next, and then get animation name, and then a new line. So this way, well, actually, let's also type in a string here. So animation data. So it's going to show. It's going to type in for me on the screen, on the console screen, all of the animations that are included within my mesh, and then I'll basically get a link of a list of those animations. So let's compile this code and run it, and we'll see what are the animations that we have. So as you see, it's running. Okay, and then when it concludes, now let me drag in the console. So you'll see, and as you see in the console screen, I had when the scene got created, I asked it to type in all of the animations that are available with my object, and then I put it in the format animation colon and then a space, and then name of the animation, name of the animation, name of the animation, and so on and so forth. Now, if you notice, the run base and run top animations, we've already used them. We've also used the dance animation in the first video when we were using non-interactive animation, skeletal animation implementation that we did. So, so obviously, these are all the animations that are included within my mesh, and for each of those, if you wanted to create and use them, you will create an animation state pointer in your frame listener, and then at the construction of the frame listener, just like we did previously, you will have to effectively get each of these animation states and populate the pointer for your animation state correspondingly, and then you'll be able to utilize these in your frame listener and animate your objects. So what we are going to do now is we are going to use the slice horizontal animation as an animation state, and then have our Sinbad to sort of perform a slice sword action. However, before we get to do the slice sword action, we'll have to give our Sinbad a sword. So we're going to go ahead and create a sword entity, and obviously we do have a sword mesh in the models that are provided with the base SDK of Ogre. So we're going to go ahead and create a sword. We're going to attach this sword to the right hand of our Sinbad mesh, and basically the right hand has a bone, and it's called handle.r, and we'll be able to actually use that as a socket and attach the sword mesh entity to it, and then our Sinbad will have a sword, and then we'll be able to perform a sword fight action or a slice horizontal action with our object. So let's close this and let's go ahead and add our sword. So we're going to still work with our create scene. And so what we'll have to do is to create an entity for a sword. And it's just basically like what we did here with the Sinbad. We created a Sinbad entity, and we use the Sinbad mesh. We're going to do the same thing, but with a sword. So we're going to create an entity pointer. And we're going to call this SWORD. It's called sword1. I'm going to add another second sword to my Sinbad in a second. And then mScene, and then mScene manager, create entity. And this create entity, let's call it SWORD sub01 for the first sword. And the mesh will be sword.mesh. So this is going to basically create my sword entity for me to attach to my object. Now, once I have the sword entity created, I can use my attach object to bone method of the entity for Sinbad, and then pass to it two variables. One would be the name of the bone that I want to attach, and then the name of the sword entity that I want, or the name of the entity that I want to attach to. Let's go ahead into our sketchbook, and I'll draw a quick overview of it, and then you'll see. So we have our Sinbad node and our Sinbad entity. And so basically, if you look at the Sinbad entity skeletal structure, it basically starts with something like a hip, and then from there you get a bunch of skeletons, around the bones that are connected. And so these bones just keep going to, and so they have this hierarchical structure. And so they basically create the skeleton for your mesh. And so when you go, for example, to the spine, and then you go to the upper arm, and then you go to the hand, and then different bone structures that are connected with it. So in our case, what we do have is for the left hand and then for the right hand, we have two bones called handle.left and handle.r. And so what I want to do is I want to create a sword mesh, basically. And it's basically a static mesh. And so it has a pivot probably created at the RGB, kind of like its pivot. It's going to look something like that. And what I would like to do is I would like to attach the sword entity to the handle.r of my mesh, so, or the skeletal mesh. So so the idea then is that we'll go in here and where we have created our sword entity, we're going to basically just attach the sword object to the Sinbad entity. So my Sinbad entity is basically Sinbad, and I'm going to attach objects to bone. And then this will take two arguments. The first argument is going to be a string, which will be the bone name. And in my case here, I'm going to go and attach it to a handle.r. And then the second object is going to be a movable object. And so an entity in my case that I have, and it's going to be the sword 1. Now this is going to attach the sword object that I created, which is a movable object, and attaches it to handle.r, which is the bone which associates to the right hand of my Sinbad mesh. So if we compile and run this code, then we should be able to see now a sword mesh created, and this Sinbad basically is holding it. Okay, obviously we're looking behind Sinbad, so we won't see it. I press the S to have my Sinbad rotate towards the camera, and now you see that the sword mesh is actually attached to the hand of this Sinbad mesh. So next, we're going to go ahead and animate it to do a horizontal slice. Now, in order to perform our slicing action for the Sinbad to use its swords and do a horizontal slice, we are going to have to go to our frame listener. That's where our animations are. So for run, we basically use an anim state base and anim state top. And we populated these, we enabled them and disabled them, and also looped them manually through by the press of our keyboard. So we'll do the same thing with the slicing action animation. We're going to have to create an anim state or animation state pointer. And this I'm going to call it anim state slice. Let's call this slice H for horizontal slicing. So the first thing we need to do is to create an animation state pointer for it. Then we're going to do inside of the constructor of our animation, we are going to populate it or create the pointer location for the animation state to do the animation state slice horizontal. And if you remember, when we showed the list of the animation that we had, slice horizontal, slice vertical were two of those animations. So we're going to have to set this animation up. So anim state slice h, we're going to make this equal to the entity get animation state, and it's going to be slice horizontal. That's the name of this animation. Then we're going to also have this actually anim state slice h, and then we're going to make anim state slice h to be set enabled false and set looping or set loop to be also false, because we do not want it to be running at the moment we created it, and also we don't want it to set loop. So now our animation state for slice horizontal has been established and has been created. Now we have access to it, and now we can actually start running it. Now what I want to do is I want this animation to be to start running or to be enabled the moment I press the left mouse button, and to reset and get disabled when I release the left mouse button. And so that's one thing I want to do. And then also I want this animation to loop while the mouse button has been effectively pressed down. So we'll do the same exact thing that we did with the walk movement. However, this time, since it's just one animation and I want to run this, I'm not going to create a Boolean variable for it. I'm just going to directly use my mouse state. So I need to have an if-else condition in which if the if statement, or rather the condition that I want it to be true, to enable the slicing animation and disable it appropriately when it's not true. And that condition is going to be the left mouse button press. So I'm going to poll my mouse, which, if you remember, was a member variable that I created from the OIS object-oriented input system from Unit 7. And then from there, I'm going to get mouse state. And then from the get mouse state, I'm going to look and see if a button is pressed down, and the button that I'm going to be looking for is going to be OIS mouse, actually MB left. Okay, so I'm asking the mouse to give me its state, and then I look at its state and see if MB left or OIS MB left has been pressed in terms of the mouse button. If it has been pressed, I'm going to enable my animation state slice horizontal. Set enabled to be true. All right, so effectively what this does is the moment I press the key button down, if the frame is being rendered at the frame started, the if statement here is going to be true, and therefore if anim state slice, so if that is true, then it's going to set the enable of my anim state to be true. Now I'm going to go to the false case of it. So if the button is not pressed at the moment that the frame is being rendered, we're going to basically go ahead and set the anim state slice horizontal set enabled to be false. Okay. Now, what we are going to do is, so the animation is going to run when it is enabled. However, when we reach the end of the animation, then we won't have any more time to add to the animation and we'll be stopped. So just like what we did with the manual looping of our animation with the keyboard controls, we're going to now also look to see if anim state slice h has ended. And if it has ended, then we're going to go and set its time to 0. So slice h set time position to be 0.0f. Now, in the case of releasing the mouse button, we're going to go and also set the anim state slice h set time position to be 0.0f. Now, notice if you forget to do the set position to 0, then your animation is going to stop at the last keyframe of it when you released the mouse and your frame got rendered. And this is going to create an artifact. So enabling the animation state is not going to run the animation. We'll have to actually add time to it to be able to run our animation. So we're going to do the anim state slice horizontal, add time, and the time that we're going to add is going to be event.time since last frame. And now our animation is going to run. So let's compile and run this code and see what we get. All right, so we have our Sinbad, and it has a mesh and a sword. And when you press the left key, you will see that your Sinbad is going to perform a slice action. It's a little bit too fast. So let's slow this animation down. And also, if you notice, this slice action is kind of a mirrored action on both of the Sinbad's hands. So it would be really, it actually behooves us to actually go ahead and give the Sinbad another sword to his right, to his left hand as well, so that we could actually do a nice little mirrored action there as well. So first thing first, we're going to go to the code and we slow down our animation a little bit. Maybe I'll make it at a 3/4 speed, like 70% speed or something like that, or 75% of its speed. And then we're going to also add another sword to our Sinbad, which should be fairly straightforward. So to slow this down, I'm going to just multiply my event time to 0.75 to slow my animation down a little bit for the slicing action, and then compile and run this code. Okay, yeah, this is a little nicer. Speed is a little bit slower. All right, and now let's go also in our create scene and give our Sinbad another mesh as well. And that process is fairly straightforward. We're just going to replicate the entity sword 1 and call it sword 2. It's going to read the same exact sword mesh, but notice and be careful, you would have to give it another unique name. So change the sword 01 to sword 02. And this time we're going to attach it to handle.l. And we're going to attach sword 2 to handle.l. So the differences were sword 1, its name is going to be sword_01. It's going to be a sword mesh, and we're going to attach sword 1 to handle R. We're going to create a sword 2, give it a name sword 02, and then attach sword 2 to handle L. That'll attach my swords to the left hand as well. So now, if I run this code and I press the left mouse button, then you will be seeing a slice horizontal action mirrored on both left hands and right hands. Okay, so this does look fairly nice. So that's our horizontal action. Okay, what I want to do also is to go ahead and create the vertical movement and have that vertical movement to, or rather vertical slice to be applied when you press the right mouse button. So in order to do that, we are going to go and create another animation state. And this time we're going to call this anim state V, slice V for the slice vertical. We are going to then go ahead and make the anim state slice V to be get animation state slice vertical. Then we'll set its looping and it's enabled to be false at the constructor of our frame listener. Then we're going to go to the frame started code, frame started function, and the process will be very, very simple. We will basically then go ahead and replicate our horizontal slice, but this time we're going to use the mouse button right, and if mouse button right was pressed, we're going to set anim state slice vertical to be enabled, and then while it is, if it is ended, if the animation has finished, we are going to set its position to 0. And if the right mouse button is not pressed, we're going to set the slice vertical animation to be set to false. And then we will set the slice V and add time to it from since last frame and run. So this now should be a very quick setup for us here to also have the slice vertical animation to play when you press the right mouse button. Okay, so left mouse button, slice horizontal, right mouse button, slice vertical. Left mouse button, slice horizontal, right mouse button, slice vertical. Now, before I finish this video up, at this point, what I would like you to do, or what I would like to give you an idea or an experiment here, is to have an animation to run backwards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the animation add time works, and then we're going to make the slice vertical of our animation to run backwards. So when we set the animation to be enabled, then the add time will effectively add the time to our animation. So when the slice animation or anim state slice V add time function is called, what it's going to do is it's going to add a certain amount of time to the animation to run. So this is how it's going to, or rather how it works. So we have our animation time frame. So it's going to be on time from 0.0f all the way to whatever that animation end time is. And then our animation is going to basically be applied to the bones of our object. So, and I'm going to run these kind of, let's say that we have RGB function, or rather curves that control the red, green, and blue, or rather XYZ orientation of a bone. So let's say that we're looking at a bone. Let's say the bone handle.r, which is where the sword, the right sword hand sword is. So RGB stand for, let's say that the XYZ rotation. So X, Y, and Z rotations of my the right hand bone that moves. So this movement controls the position and the orientation of the right hand, which basically then the FK system in Ogre will take over and animate the body of your object. So what we will do, what we did is we said, so this was an anim state, right? So it was an anim state H, which was let's say the horizontal movement, and then what we did is we added time, and then this is going to be a real number that is passed to it. So from 0.0f to whatever number it is, end time of our animation. So when the Ogre rendering mechanism runs, at each time, let's say that the frame started happens here. So these dark areas are going to be frame started time, right? So it's going to be frame started. Let's say that frame number 1 happens at this time. So then it's going to look and see how much time was elapsed since the last frame. And this is time since last frame. And it's going to add this time to your animation here. And then you will be moving the object's points, your object's bones, kind of orienting them to there. And then let's say that frame 2 happens here. When frame 2 happens here, then what's going to happen is that you're going to look and see how much time that was. So this will be now your time since last frame. And then you're going to add this time now to your object, and then you're going to use these values to animate. And then when the new time frame comes in, let's say that it's here, then you're going to add this amount of time, and then you're going to pick these points to animate your object. So by add time, you're basically going to run this object and make it go all the way, and so animate it along these points. And then what we did is, with our slice horizontal and slice vertical, is we look to see if the animation has ended, which means that now the time that we had it out here is greater than, so the time is greater than the end time of our animation. Then that means that this means that the animation has ended. Right? So when the anim state ended, then what we did is we reset the time to 0. So then the next frame, when it ran, then we added the amount of time from the 0 of our animation. So we created this looping process manually. What we're going to do now for slice horizontal, I want to make the animation to go backwards. So when I press the button, I'm going to enable my animation and then set the animation to be at the end of its time frame. And then I'm going to add to it backwards. So I'm going to see how much time has elapsed, and then I'm going to add it backwards, or negative of it, to my animation. And then I check to see if the animation time is 0. If it is 0, then I'm going to make it the end of the animation. And we can use the end, or rather the get length member variable of an animation state to be able to implement it. So let's go to code and implement this process as well. So here what I have is I said if the left mouse button is held true, then I set and enabled my animation state to run. If it was not true, then I set and disabled my animation state slice vertical by setting its enable to time. However, if I release the mouse button, or the mouse button is not pressed, then instead of resetting it, I'm going to actually go ahead and move it to the end of the animation. So I'm going to do set time to anim state slice vertical, and then get length. So what this does for me is if the mouse button is not pressed, the animation would be set to false and its position will be moved to the end of the animation. Then what I'm going to do is instead of multiplying it by a positive number when it's run, I'm going to multiply it by a negative 0.75. So this sort of makes my animation to play backwards. Now, one last thing that I need to also change is now that my animation is going backwards, I'm not going to look to see if the slice V animation has ended. I'm going to get its time position and then see if it has reached 0.0f, or if it is less than or equal to 0.0f. So if my time position has reached to the beginning of this animation, then I'm going to go ahead and basically set the time frame to be the end of anim state slice V get length. So when I set my animation to true and the right mouse button is held, it's going to be running, and so some negative value is going to be added to its timeline, so it's going to go backwards. And then I see if the value and if the time position is actually finished and it's kind of falling out of scope of being less than 0 or equal to 0, then I'm going to reset it back to the end of the animation to make it go backwards. So let's run this. Now my slice verticals should be a backwards slice animation instead of a forward vertical slice animation. So let's try that and see how it works. So this is my ogre, and then as you see now, when I press the right button, it kind of slices backwards. Before, when you press the mouse button, it would move the hands up and then slice downwards vertically. And now when I press the right button, the slice is applied backwards. So in order to establish this backward slicing or the backward playing of your animation, you basically reset your animation at the end of its time frame, and then when it's enabled, then you test to see if you reach the beginning of the time frame. If that was the case, then you reset it to the end of the time frame. For the forward, and then you multiply your add time by a negative number. For forward playing of your animation, just like the horizontal, you basically start at time 0, and then you add a positive value to its add time. If you reach the end of your animation, then you reset it to 0. So the difference between the two is that for forward, you start at 0, you multiply your add time value, you give it a positive value, and then when you reach the end of the animation, you reset it to 0. For backward or reverse playback of your animation, you start at the end of the animation, you add a negative value to the add time, or you use a negative value to the add time, and if you reach 0, then you reset back to the end of your animation, and that would be a forward or a backward animation. Okay, so with this, you should have a very good understanding of how to use skeletal animation in Ogre and establish a kind of a nice looking, really, 3D app, 3D game utilizing Ogre. Obviously, the animations and the meshes and the models that you create are going to be created in third-party tools like 3ds Max, Maya, Blender, and whatnot. You export those into your Ogre, and then once you have them in your Ogre media repository, you'll be able to actually use these by creating entities, using animation states, using your frame listeners, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a has been an interesting I think video for us to kind of make our objects a little bit more interesting by adding animation to them. And then I think at this point you should be ready for your project. The project, if you haven't worked on it, I think you should start for your midterm project and get the process going. And let me know if you have any questions. And this wraps up what I had for this semester in terms of using Ogre. We practically covered almost everything. The things that we didn't cover are the effectively using your scene managers and building scenes from scratch, which most of the time you usually don't. And if you do, your textbook has a very interesting set of chapters in terms of utilizing your scene managers and building your scenes from scratch, and so on and so forth. So this wraps up our journey in Ogre 3D, and I hope that you liked and you enjoyed it so far. And next we are going to switch to Unreal Engine 4. And until then, I let you have fun and enjoy the gameplay and the mechanics that you will be able to implement. And then I'll talk to you in the next unit.